The morning Cedric Osei walked out of the courthouse in Halifax, it was raining the way it rains in November. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just cold and relentless and indifferent to whatever was happening to you. He stood on the top step for a moment too long, long enough that a woman behind him said, "Excuse me," and he had to move aside. He looked out at the parking lot where his car used to be, a 2019 Silverado that now belonged legally and permanently to his ex-wife Renee. She hadn't even wanted the truck. Her lawyer had suggested it as leverage, and it had worked. Cedric had traded the truck for 2 extra days a week with his daughter. He walked to the bus stop in the rain without an umbrella. He was 41 years old, and he took the bus home. You should know something about Cedric before we go any further. He was not a dramatic man. He did not catastrophize. He did not make speeches in parking lots or leave long voicemails or send emails at 2 in the morning. He had grown up in a Ghanaian household in Dartmouth where his mother had a thing she repeated. So often it had become almost meaningless until it wasn't. What you carry quietly is what builds you. Cedric had carried a lot of things quietly over the years. His father's death when he was 19. 2 failed business attempts before the third one stuck. And now this, the dissolution of an 11-year marriage laid out in 8 typed pages and a judge's signature. Everything divided with the kind of clinical fairness that felt, somehow, worse than cruelty. He had the apartment. He had his tool. He had Fridays, Saturdays, Sundays, and every other Wednesday. He had his daughter, Petra, who was 7, and who had her mother's eyes and his stubbornness and a laugh that could reorganize a bad day entirely. That was not nothing. Cedric reminded himself of this on the bus ride home. That was not nothing at all. The apartment was on Barrington Street, 3rd floor, radiator that clanged through the night like it had an argument to finish. Cedric had taken it furnished because he had nothing to furnish anything with. The previous tenant had left a couch the color of old mustard and a kitchen table with one leg slightly shorter than the others. Cedric had fixed the table leg the first week and decided he could live with the couch. He made himself tea and sat by the window and looked at the street below. A woman was trying to get a stroller through a door that wasn't cooperating. A man in a bright yellow jacket was arguing with his phone. Ordinary afternoon, ordinary city. Cedric had $3,200 in his checking account, a business that had been treading water for the better part of a year, and child support payments that started in 30 days. His company, Osei Millwork, the name still on the side of a van he'd had to sell back in March, had done fine work for 8 years. Custom cabinetry, commercial build-outs, one very well-received renovation of a restaurant on Barrington Street that had gotten a write-up in a local designs magazine. He had 3 employees, he had contracts, he also had a landlord for his shop space who had raised the rent twice in 14 months, a supplier who'd gone bankrupt mid-order, and a line of credit that was nearly maxed out from keeping his people employed through a slow spring. The divorce had not caused this. The divorce had simply arrived at the same time, the way disasters often do. Not one catastrophe, but a cluster of them, each one manageable alone, collectively almost impossible. Cedric finished his tea. He called Petra. She answered on the second ring the way she always did, already in the middle of a sentence about something that had happened at school. He listened for 20 minutes. He did not mention the courthouse or the rain or the Silverado. When he said goodnight, she said, "Dad, are we going to be okay?" He had not told her anything. Kids know anyway. "We're going to be more than okay," he said. "I promise you that." He meant it. He had no idea how to make it true. He meant it anyway. He didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table with the short leg that wasn't short anymore and went through his numbers for the 3rd time that week, as though looking hard enough at them would change them. It didn't. He was running out of runway. 4 months, maybe 5, if he was careful and got lucky with a new contract. After that, he would have to lay off someone. He had never laid off anyone. His employees were not abstract to him. Kwame had worked with him since year 2 and sent money to his mother in Accra every month. Priya was 24 and had just started evening courses at NSCC. Devon had a baby coming in March. Cedric closed the notebook and put his hands in flat on the table. He thought about his mother's voice. What you carry quietly is what builds you. He thought about Petra asking if they were going to be okay. He did not let himself spiral. He had decided years ago that spiraling was a luxury he couldn't afford, which is perhaps why he was better in a crisis than most people expected, and worse at ordinary happiness than he'd like to admit. He went to bed at 2 in the morning. He was at the shop by 6:30. There was work to do, and work was the one language he had always spoken fluently. 4 weeks after the courthouse, Cedric got a call from a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer. He'd been getting calls from the line of credit people, and he was tired of performing calm at 9 in the morning. "Is this Cedric Osei?" A woman's voice, measured. The kind of voice that was comfortable being in charge of rooms. It is. My name is Francesca Lund. I'm calling about your work. Specifically, a project you completed, a restaurant on Barrington Street. The renovation from 2022. Cedric had done that renovation for a man named Gilles, a former chef who'd scraped together everything he had to open a 40-seat bistro. Cedric had come in under budget and 3 days early. He'd built the bar from reclaimed Douglas fir Gilles had sourced from a barn in the Annapolis Valley, and the thing had looked like it had been there for decades the moment it was finished. Yes, Cedric said carefully. That was us. I own the building next door, Francesca Lund said. I've been inside that restaurant many times. The bar, the millwork along the ceiling, the detail on the service station. A pause. I'd like to meet with you. He met her 3 days later at a coffee shop on Spring Garden Road. He arrived early, which he always did. She arrived exactly on time, which he would learn she also always did. Francesca Lund was 53, though she didn't look it or act it in the way people mean when they say that, which is usually a backhanded thing. She looked exactly her age and was entirely comfortable with that. She wore a dark coat and no jewelry except a watch that was understated enough to be expensive. She was the kind of woman who did not explain herself walking into a room. Cedric had looked her up before the meeting. He'd been thorough about it, the way he was thorough about everything. Francesca Lund was the founder and chair of Lund Group, a Halifax-based real estate and development company that had been responsible for 3 of the most significant heritage restoration projects in the city over the past decade. She had started it at 31 with an inheritance from her grandmother, a woman named Birta, who had immigrated from Iceland and run a small property company in Lunenburg for 40 years. Francesca had taken a modest inheritance and built something substantial, not through flash, but through precision. She was known, according to 2 different profiles he'd found, for walking every site herself and for firing contractors who cut corners, which she apparently could detect within minutes of arrival. She was not, as far as Cedric could determine, someone who wasted her time. She ordered black coffee. She asked him questions for 40 minutes. Not about his credentials, which she'd already looked up, about his philosophy. Why reclaimed wood. How he handled a contractor who delivered the wrong material mid-build. What he would have done differently on the Barrington Street project if he'd had full creative authority. That last question surprised him. He answered it honestly. There was one junction in the ceiling detail he'd compromised on because of time. And she nodded slowly. Most people tell me they wouldn't change a thing, she said. That's not a useful answer. She looked at him for a moment. No, she said. It isn't. A heritage building on Hollis Street, a former textile warehouse from 1893, 12,000 square feet across 4 floors. She had the permits. She had a vision. Mixed-use commercial on the ground floor, offices above with every original beam and brick retained where structurally possible. She had already dismissed 2 contractors. The first had come in over budget before the project even started. The second had proposed covering the original ceiling to simplify the electrical work. Covering it, Cedric said. He had good reasons, Francesca said. They were still wrong. Cedric understood immediately what she was describing. Buildings like that, old buildings that had survived long enough to be worth saving, they had something that new construction didn't and couldn't replicate. Covering that ceiling wouldn't have been a practical decision. It would have been a small erasure. Acceptable on a spreadsheet, indefensible to anyone who cared. He cared. He'd always cared. It had not always been profitable, caring this much. What's the timeline? He said. 8 months from contract to completion. I don't negotiate on timelines. What's the budget? She told him. It was real. It was serious. It was the kind of number that would not solve every problem Cedric had, but that would give him space and time and the chance to build something that mattered. He did not perform nonchalance. He also did not let the relief show on his face. He simply nodded and said, I'd need 2 weeks to give you a proper quote. You have 10 days, Francesca Lund said, and smiled for the first time. He gave her the quote in 9. She called him the next morning. There are 3 items I want to discuss. They discussed them. On 2, she was right. On 1, Cedric held firm, explaining his reasoning in precise terms without apology, and Francesca listened and said, all right, just like that. No performance of concession. Just, all right. The contract was signed on a Thursday afternoon in her office on the 11th floor of a building on Purdy's Wharf, with the harbor visible through the windows and a low December sky pressing down on the water. Cedric signed his name and thought about his mother, and thought about Petra and did not cry, which was something he was quietly proud of for approximately 30 seconds, and then he focused on the work. There were things that happened between the signing and the building that you should know about, because they matter, even if they don't fit neatly into the parts of the story that feel important in retrospect. Quam noticed something was different within a week. "You're walking different," he said one morning, not meanly, just observationally. "I'm walking the same way I always walk," Cedric said. "No," said Quam, "you're walking like something heavy got lighter." Something had, not removed. The child support payments were real. The line of credit was still a weight. The divorce still had its ragged edges that didn't smooth overnight, but lighter, just enough. He told Petra about the project on one of her weekends, Saturday morning, both of them at the kitchen table with the fixed leg, eating eggs and watching snow come down outside. "Is it a big building?" she asked. "Very old and very big," he said. "It was built before your great-great-grandmother was born." She thought about this seriously. "Were they careful when they built it?" "Somebody was," Cedric said. "That's why it's still standing." Petra nodded like this confirmed something she'd already suspected about the world. "You'll be careful with it," she said. It wasn't a question. She said it the way kids say things when they know something about a parent that the parent sometimes forgets about themselves. Cedric looked at his daughter for a moment. "Yeah," he said, "I will." The project was hard. That needs to be said plainly, because what comes after isn't meaningful without it. The first 3 months were the kind of difficult that doesn't make for good stories while you're inside it. Just problem after problem, each one solvable and exhausting. A structural engineer found a compromised beam on the 3rd floor that required redesigning 15 feet of the build plan. A heritage permit addendum delayed the exterior work by 3 weeks. Cedric dealt with each of these things the way he dealt with everything, methodically, without drama, sometimes at 11 o'clock at night with bad coffee and a notepad. Francesca came by the site twice a month, always unannounced, which Cedric had expected and prepared for. She walked every floor. She asked specific questions. She did not chat. But there was something in the way she looked at the original brickwork, the way her hand would sometimes rest briefly on a wall, like she was listening to it, that Cedric recognized. It was the same thing he felt when he was working on something that deserved to survive. One afternoon in February, she came by during a complicated moment. Cedric was on the 2nd floor dealing with a subcontractor who had, in fact, made an error that would cost them 2 days. Cedric was not yelling. He was not dismissive. He was standing with a set of drawings and explaining, very calmly and very clearly, what had happened and what was going to happen next to fix it. And the subcontractor was nodding, because Cedric had a way of making accountability feel like a path forward rather than a verdict. Francesca watched this from the stairs. She didn't interrupt. Later, as she was leaving, she stopped beside Cedric and said, "You didn't make him feel small. That doesn't help anyone," Cedric said. She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, not dramatically. Francesca Lund did nothing dramatically, but he noticed it. "No," she said. "It doesn't." She left. Cedric went back to the 2nd floor. In March, Francesca asked him to come to a meeting at her office. She didn't say what it was about. He assumed it was a project issue and spent an hour reviewing his notes before going. It was not a project issue. There were 2 other people in the room. A man named Fletcher, who was Francesca's operations director, and a woman named Sable Mensah, who was introduced as the incoming lead for Lund Group's new division, a heritage consulting arm they were expanding across Atlantic Canada. Francesca said, without preamble, "We want to talk to you about a larger relationship." The meeting lasted an hour and a half. What Francesca was proposing was not a single contract but an ongoing partnership. Osei Millwork as the preferred millwork and restoration contractor for Lund Group's heritage portfolio across Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and eventually PEI. 4 confirmed projects in the pipeline. A preferred vendor agreement with retainer terms that would mean guaranteed work through the next 3 years. Cedric sat across the table and listened to this carefully. He asked questions. He did not perform gratitude, which Francesca clearly did not want. He asked about the liability structure, about the timeline flexibility on multi-project years, about what happened if Lund Group's portfolio shifted. Sable was taking notes. Fletcher was watching Cedric with the particular attention of someone who has sat through a lot of meetings and knows when something real is happening. "Why us?" Cedric asked finally. "Specifically." Francesca considered the question as though it deserved to be considered. "Because you finished the Hollis Street project without calling me unless you needed a decision," she said. "Because the foreman I sent over in January reported that your crew worked like people who understood what they were building. And because when you found the beam problem in November, you called me within the hour and came in with 3 options and a recommendation." She paused. I've worked with contractors who manage me. I don't want that. I want someone who solves things. Cedric thought about Kwame. He thought about Priya, who had just finished her first term at NSCC. He thought about Devon, whose daughter had been born in early March, healthy and loud, 7 pounds 4 ounces, a fact Devon had shared by holding up his phone with the photo without saying anything, because Devon was not a man of many words either. "I'll need a week," Cedric said. "You have 5 days," Francesca said, and there was that smile again, brief, real, a little wry. She had moved back to Accra when his father died and never returned, but they spoke every week without fail. He told her about the meeting. He did not dramatize it. He just told her factually what had been offered. There was a long silence on the line. "Cedric," his mother said, "I know. Your father would have. I know, Mom." Not sad exactly, the kind of silence that holds more than words do. "You called me before anyone else," she said. "You're always first," he said. She laughed. It was a short, warm laugh. "Say yes," she said, "and then get some sleep." He said yes. He then failed entirely to get sleep, spending most of the night reviewing the terms he'd want in the counter-proposal, which was in keeping with his character. What happened next? The thing that made it a story worth telling rather than just a life, going quietly in the right direction. Started with a phone call that Cedric did not expect, from Francesca Lund on a Tuesday morning in May. He was at the shop working on the millwork for the third project site when his phone rang. "There's someone I'd like you to meet," Francesca said. "I know this is short notice. Are you free for lunch?" He was not free for lunch. He was covered in sawdust and behind by 40 minutes on a delivery schedule. "I can be," he said. The restaurant was the bistro on Barrington Street, Gial's place, the one where everything had started. Cedric noticed this and filed it away. Francesca was not sentimental, so this was a choice. The third person at the table was a man named Aldous Pemberton, late 60s. A Nova Scotia face, weathered, specific, the kind of face that had been places and stopped needing to prove it. He wore a flannel shirt and spoke the way certain people in positions of enormous power speak when they've made peace with it. Quietly, and without requiring you to already know who they were. Cedric did not know who he was. He found out during lunch. Aldous Pemberton had made his money in shipping, decades ago, and had spent the last 20 years redirecting most of it into heritage preservation, affordable trade education, and rural infrastructure across the Maritimes. He sat on 3 provincial boards. He funded 2 apprenticeship programs. He had been, according to a foundation website Cedric would look up later, quietly responsible for saving 11 historic buildings across Nova Scotia in the last 15 years, not by putting his name on them, but by making the money available and then stepping back. He had known Francesca for 30 years. He had seen the work on Hollis Street. "Francesca tells me," he said over fish chowder, "that you have a philosophy about old buildings." Cedric thought about how to answer this. "I think they already know what they are," he said. "The job is to listen to them and not get in the way." Aldous looked at him steadily. "Yes," he said, "that's exactly it." They talked for 2 hours. About buildings, about craft, about what gets lost when you replace things rather than restore them. About the apprenticeship gap in the skilled trades, which Aldous had been trying to address with mixed results and was clearly frustrated about. About Cedric's own path, the failed first attempts, the third try that had finally worked, what he'd learned from the things that hadn't. Cedric talked more than he usually did. It wasn't the way the conversation was steered. It was something about being in a room with 2 people who were genuinely listening. Near the end of the meal, Aldous said, "I have a project coming up. A cannery building on Cape Breton. 1901, original structure mostly intact, sitting empty for 12 years. I've had 3 architectural firms look at it. Nobody has given me a plan I believe in." He looked at Cedric. "I'd like you to come see it." Cedric drove up to Cape Breton on a Saturday, Petra in the back seat asking questions about everything out the window, because she had asked to come and he had said yes without a moment's hesitation. She was 8 by then. She had her mother's eyes and her grandmother's patience and her father's habit of watching things carefully before she said anything. The cannery stood at the edge of a cove, backed against rock, facing water the color of slate. It was long and low and built from local stone, with a timber roof that partially collapsed on one end and held firm on the other. The windows were gone, but the window frames were not. The original loading dock, built on timber pilings, was still there, corrected by time to a slight lean. But there, Petra got out of the car and stood looking. "It's tired," she said. "Yes," Cedric said, "but it's not broken." He looked at his daughter. She was 8 years old. She had, apparently, inherited the philosophy. "No," he said, "it's not broken." He walked the building for 3 hours. He made notes. He took photographs. He asked Aldis's site manager the questions he needed answered, and some of those questions surprised the site manager, who said later, to Aldis, that the contractor had asked about the original quarry and whether any matching stone was still available, which no one else had thought to ask. On the drive home, Petra fell asleep in the back seat, somewhere around Antigonish. Cedric drove through the early evening with the window cracked and thought about the building. He thought about the pilings on the dock, which would need specialized marine work. He thought about the collapsed end, which would require reconstruction rather than restoration, and how you did that in a way that was honest, that didn't pretend to be original but didn't apologize for being necessary. He thought about the original window frames still standing after a century of salt air. Whoever had built them had used old-growth timber, slow-grown and dense, and had done the joinery properly. 120 years later, it was still holding the shape. What you carry quietly is what builds you. He drove home. Petra woke up as they crossed the bridge back into Halifax, looked out the window at the harbor lights, and said, "Are you going to fix that building, Dad?" "I'm going to try," Cedric said. "It'll be good when it's fixed," she said, already half asleep again. He wanted to tell her, "It won't be fixed, it'll be restored, which is different, which means acknowledging everything it's been through rather than pretending it didn't happen." He wanted to tell her that the goal wasn't to make it look like nothing had gone wrong. The goal was to make it strong enough that what had gone wrong no longer mattered. He didn't say any of that. He was tired and she was almost asleep, and some things keep better when they're carried quietly. "Yeah," he said stead, "it will." The proposal for the cannery was the best work Cedric had ever put on paper. He knew it when he was writing it, and he didn't let himself be embarrassed by knowing. He spent 3 weeks on it. He brought in a structural engineer he trusted, and a marine specialist and a heritage mason from Lunenburg, who had done 2 similar projects on the South Shore. He wrote the proposal like someone who had spent his whole working life preparing for this exact problem, because he delivered it to Aldis on a Friday morning in a folder printed, emailed, printed, and delivered in person because some things deserved that. Aldis read it over the weekend. On Monday, he called Cedric. "I've shown this to 2 people I trust," he said. They both said the same thing. Cedric waited. They said it was the first proposal they'd seen that didn't treat the building as a problem to be solved, Aldis said. That it treated it like a place worth knowing. A silence. "I'd like to move forward," Aldis said. Cedric sat in the front seat of his truck, a second-hand F-150 he'd bought 3 months ago, in the parking lot of the Silverado, perfectly fine in Halifax on a Monday morning in August, and said, "I'd like that too." He sat in the truck for another 5 minutes after the call ended, just sitting. The radio was off. The harbor was somewhere to his left, invisible from the lot, but you could smell it on certain mornings. He could smell it now. He thought about the courthouse steps in November, the rain, the bus. He thought about $3,200 in a checking account and a mustard-colored couch and a radiator with an argument to finish. He thought about Petra asking, "Are we going to be okay?" and himself saying, "We're going to be more than okay," into the phone in a voice he'd had to construct carefully so the truth of not knowing wouldn't come through. It occurred to him now that he had not lied to her. He had not known, but he had not lied. That felt important. He couldn't fully explain why, but it did. He got out of the truck. Kwame was already at the shop door with coffee, because Kwame knew things before they were said. He looked at Cedric's face and raised an eyebrow. Cedric took the coffee. Kwame nodded slowly, the way you nod when something feels like it was always going to happen. "Big?" Cedric looked out at the street, an ordinary Halifax morning. Someone cycling past, a streetcar further up, groaning on the turn, a gray sky that might burn off by noon. Big. They went inside. There was work to do.